My name is Andre. I'm 21, and I never imagined that my father's decision to hire a temporary ranch hand would completely change my perspective on desire, masculinity, and who I really am. But it did. Our eyes met for the first time on a March morning, when he arrived through the main gate with a worn-out backpack on his shoulder and that posture of someone who has already carried the world on their back. My father made quick introductions. Andre, this is Marcos. He'll be staying for about 3 months helping with the new fence and handling the cattle. Marcos was 55, with close-cropped gray hair, huge hands marked by old calluses, and a way of moving that was pure economy of effort. He looked me up and down quickly, gave a nod, and just said, "Kid." In that moment, something shifted inside me. I can't explain it right. It was March, late summer, that dry heat that leaves everything kind of dusty and heavy. My father's farm is 25 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by pasture, silence, and open sky. I was spending a season there, helping with chores after dropping out of a business degree that never made sense to me. My life was in a kind of limbo. I didn't know what I wanted to do, nor did I have the courage to admit what I felt inside. Marcos was put in the back room of the staff quarters, a simple exposed brick building about 100 meters from the main house. My father explained the routine. Coffee at 5:30 in the morning, field work until noon, lunch, rest, and more work until 5 in the afternoon. I was supposed to shadow Marcos for the first few days, show him the property boundaries, introduce the animals, explain where the tools were kept. It was a simple task. I was the boss's son. He was the hired hand. The hierarchy was clear, drawn out, comfortable. But reality started to crack that hierarchy on the very first day of working together. We headed out right after coffee, the dew still wetting our boots. Marcos carried a portable electric fence on his shoulder like it was a fishing rod, and I carried the toolkit in a wooden box that weighed twice what I expected. We walked in silence for about 20 minutes to the farm's northern boundary, where my father wanted to put up the new fence. The sun was starting to heat up, and the smell of dry earth mixed with grass grew stronger with every step. Marcos stopped, dropped his load to the ground with no apparent effort, took off his worn cap, and wiped his hand across his forehead. "Let's start here," he said, with that deep, raspy voice of a lifelong smoker. I nodded, trying to look useful, but the truth was, I had no idea how to start. He noticed. Without saying a word, he grabbed the shovel, drove it hard into the ground, and started digging the first post hole. The muscles in his arms flexed under his sweat-stained long-sleeved shirt, and I just stood there, holding the hammer like an idiot. "You just gonna stand there watching, kid?" He wasn't being rude. It was a genuine question, almost amused. I snapped out of my trance and started helping. We worked side by side for 4 hours straight. He dug, I held the post. He hammered, I stretched the wire. The rhythm emerged naturally, as if we had done this together 1,000 times. And all that time, I couldn't stop noticing things. The way he took a deep breath before exerting force, the metallic sound of his belt hitting the buckle when he bent down, the smell of cigarettes mixed with sweat radiating from him when the wind shifted. I'd never looked at another man like that before, and it terrified me. At lunch, we went back to the main house. My mother had prepared rice, beans, roast beef, and salad. Marcos ate in silence, methodical, unhurried. My father commented on the work, said he was satisfied with the progress. Marcos just nodded, downed a whole glass of ice water in one go, and stood up. "I'm gonna rest a bit," he said, and left. I stayed seated at the table, pushing my food around without an appetite. My mother asked if I was okay. I said yes, just tired. But the truth was, I was confused. My heart had raced when Marcos brushed his hand against mine to adjust the post's position. It was a quick, functional touch, unintentional. But my body reacted like it was an electric shock. This wasn't right. I shouldn't be feeling this way. He was a man. I was a man. He was more than twice my age. He worked for my father. Everything was wrong. Everything was out of place. And yet, when it was time to go back to the fields that afternoon, I felt a strange anxiety, almost an eagerness, as if I were about to do something forbidden. Over the following weeks, the routine solidified. Wake up early, quick coffee, field, lunch, rest, more field, dinner, sleep. But within that routine, little things started to change. I started paying attention to when Marcos arrived for coffee. I began to notice he always sat in the same spot, always drank his coffee black, always thanked my mother with a respectful, "Thank you very much, ma'am." I started realizing he never complained about the work, never spoke about his own life, never asked for anything beyond what was agreed, and I started finding excuses to be around him. Let me help with that. I want to learn how to splice wire properly. You got a minute? I'll grab us some water, stick around. He never questioned anything. He just accepted my presence with that irritating calmness of someone used to working alone but who doesn't mind company. And with each passing day, I caught myself watching him more. The way he lit his cigarette, cupping his hand to shield the flame from the wind. The way he whistled softly when he was focused. The way he'd stare at the horizon sometimes, as if recalling a distant memory. One morning, about 3 weeks after he arrived, I was organizing tools in the shed when Marcos walked in. He needed a pair of pliers left there the day before. My back was turned, sorting nails into separate boxes, so I didn't hear him approach. When I turned around, he was less than a meter away, standing there, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "Sorry, kid. Didn't mean to startle you." "You didn't." My voice came out higher pitched than I intended. He grabbed the pliers from the bench next to me, but didn't back away immediately. He stood there, too close, for too long. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, the smell of cheap soap mixed with earth. My heart raced. I didn't know if I should step back, say something, or move at all. Then he spoke, slowly. "You okay, kid? You seem kinda... I don't know. Lost." I gave an awkward laugh. "I'm good. Just thinking about life." He nodded, took a step back, and the spell was broken. "If you need to talk, I'm around. I know what it's like to get stuck in your own head." And he walked out. I stood there for a solid 5 minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Nothing had happened. Yet, something had changed. He had noticed. I don't know what exactly, but he saw that I wasn't okay. And instead of ignoring it, he offered a listening ear. A 55-year-old farmhand, a temp hire, cared more about me in that moment than my own father had in months. And that completely disarmed me. That night, lying in bed, I let my mind wander to places I'd always avoided. I thought about Marcos taking off his shirt after a hot day's work. I thought about his large hands holding mine. I thought about what it would be like to be pressed against that solid, weathered, real body. And for the first time in my life, I didn't try to push those thoughts away. I let them stay. I felt the arousal grow. Hot and shameful, but undeniable. I was attracted to him. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't respect. It was desire. Raw, confusing, terrifying, but completely real. And the worst part? I didn't know what to do with it. I couldn't tell anyone. I couldn't act on it. I couldn't even fully admit it to myself without feeling a heavy, religious, ancestral guilt. My family was conservative. My town was small. My father had very clear opinions on what a real man was. And there I was, crushing like an idiot teenager on a 50-something farmhand who probably had no idea what was going on in my head. But the body doesn't lie, and mine was screaming a truth I had spent 21 years trying to silence. In the days that followed, I started testing boundaries. Nothing too obvious, just proximity. I'd brush my arm against his when we were working close together. I'd hold on to tools a second longer when handing them to him. I invented reasons to go shirtless around him, pretending the heat was unbearable. I wanted to see if he reacted. I wanted a sign, anything to indicate I wasn't alone in this madness. And then, on an April afternoon, something happened that changed everything. We were fixing the water pump for the horse trough, a dirty job that required getting into a narrow trench, barely half a meter wide. I went down first, and Marcos stayed up top handing me tools. At one point, I needed a screwdriver that was on his belt. "Marcos, pass me the Phillips screwdriver." "Where is it?" "On your belt. Left side." He crouched at the edge of the trench, fumbling for the tool without taking off his belt. He leaned over me, his face just inches from mine, his warm breath hitting my forehead. Our eyes met. And this time it was different. It wasn't a quick, functional, work-related glance. It was a lingering, heavy look, charged with something unspoken. He froze for 3-4 seconds. So did I. The world stopped. The sound of horses in the distance faded away. There was only that tiny space between us, vibrating with an electric tension I could almost touch. Then he blinked, grabbed the screwdriver, handed it to me, and pulled away too quickly. "Here." I took the tool with a trembling hand. We finished the job in absolute silence. A different kind of silence. Tense, heavy, full of unasked questions. When we got back to the house, he went straight to his room without dinner. Said he wasn't hungry. I couldn't eat either. I stood on the porch, smoking a cigarette I'd stolen from my father's pack, trying to process what had happened. Because something had happened. I wasn't crazy. That look was real. The hesitation was real. The tension was real. Did he feel it too? Did he realize what I was feeling and get uncomfortable? Or maybe he felt the same thing? That last possibility was the most terrifying of all. Because if he felt it, then this wasn't just a fantasy in my head. It was a possible reality. Dangerous. Forbidden. But possible. And I didn't know if I wanted it to be true, or if I was praying I was wrong. I tried to convince myself it was just curiosity. You know that feeling when you try to rationalize something that is clearly beyond reason? It was exactly that. Every morning I woke up promising myself it would be different, that I would maintain the appropriate professional distance between the boss's son and the employee. But every time I heard the rumble of his truck arriving before sunrise, my heart raced in a way I couldn't control. I started watching him more deliberately. It wasn't that accidental, fleeting glance anymore. No. I was actively looking for reasons to be near him. Did the north pasture fence need fixing? I offered to help. Did the hay bales in the barn need reorganizing? There I was. My dad even mentioned I was finally acting like an adult, never guessing that my motivation had nothing to do with responsibility and everything to do with a man in his 50s who smelled like dirt and cigarettes. What fascinated me most about him was his stillness. Marcos wasn't the type to fill the silence with empty words. When he did speak, every syllable carried weight. His voice had a deep timbre that seemed to vibrate in my chest, especially when we were working side by side in enclosed spaces. In the barn, for example, where sound echoed differently, where I could hear his breathing when he carried something heavy, where I noticed how the muscles in his forearm flexed when he gripped a rope. A week after that first longer conversation, we settled into an unplanned routine. He would arrive at 5:30 in the morning. I would casually come down for coffee at 5:40. My mother was so happy thinking I was becoming an early riser that she started brewing fresh coffee earlier. If only she knew I was just timing my appearance to coincide with the 15 minutes Marcos took before heading out to the fields. It was during one of those mornings that I noticed the details no one else saw. The small scar at the corner of his left eyebrow. The way he held the cup with both hands, as if absorbing the warmth. His hands. God, his hands. Calloused and rough. But his nails were always clean despite the manual work. Hands that said everything about years of hard, honest labor. Hands so different from mine were still soft, despite all the farm work I'd been doing. Have you ever noticed how certain physical details of a person can get etched into your mind? How you can close your eyes and visualize perfectly something as specific as the shape of someone's fingers? Well, that's what was happening to me. I'd close my eyes at night and see those hands. I imagined what it would be like to feel them. And then I'd wake up sweating, confused, 24 years old, and with absolutely no clarity about what the hell was happening to me. The class difference between us became painfully obvious one Thursday night. My father insisted Marcos have dinner with us because the rain had started coming down hard, and he shouldn't drive that old truck in those conditions. I saw the tension in his shoulders when he sat at our table, as if he were occupying a space that didn't belong to him. My mother served the stew in the good serving dishes. My father talked about the harvest, and Marcos ate in silence, answering when asked, always polite, always measured. But I saw what they didn't see. I saw how he held the silverware with excessive care, conscious of every movement. How he waited for my father to start before taking a second piece of bread. How his eyes, for a split second, landed on my grandmother's antique china cabinet with an expression I couldn't immediately identify. Sadness? Resignation? The acute awareness that, no matter how many dinners we shared, he would always be the employee and we would always be the bosses? That broke me in a way I didn't expect. For the first time, I really considered the complexity of the situation. It wasn't just the age difference, or my confusion about sexuality, or the fact that my father literally signed his paychecks. It was all of that intertwined with class issues that I, privileged and sheltered, had never truly had to confront. After dinner, I showed him the guest room where he would sleep. A small but comfortable room, with a single bed and a window overlooking the field. He thanked me 3 times. 3. As if being sheltered from the rain in a heated house was an extraordinary kindness, and not a basic human gesture. I couldn't sleep that night. Knowing he was there, just 2 hallways away, changed the energy of the whole house. I kept wondering if he was awake too, if he was thinking of me, if he had noticed my glances, if he thought I was a spoiled kid too pampered to understand anything about real life. The next morning, the rain had passed but left the ground soaked. Field work was out of the question, so my father assigned some maintenance tasks in the barn. Marcos and I spent the whole morning repairing tools, organizing equipment, replacing rotten floorboards. It was during this work that the shift happened. We were moving a heavy metal workbench, each holding one end. The space was tight between the shelves full of tools. We had to coordinate carefully, our bodies closely aligned. I was moving backward, guided by his instructions. More to the left, slow down, now turn a little, when my foot slipped on a board that was still damp. I didn't fall, because his hand shot out to grip my elbow with a firmness that was simultaneously strong and surprisingly gentle. For 3, maybe 4 seconds, we froze in that position. My balance recovered, but his hand still on my arm. Our faces closer than they had ever been. Close enough for me to see the silver threads mixed in with the brown of his beard. Close enough to feel his body heat despite the morning chill. Close enough to notice that his eyes weren't just brown, but had tiny golden flecks near the pupil. "Easy," he said, his voice rougher than usual. And there was something in that word, something that meant more than just watching my step. Or was I reading into it? Looking for signs that weren't there just because I wanted them to be. He let go of my arm and we went back to work. But something had changed. The air seemed denser. Every casual movement, him handing me a tool, our fingers brushing briefly, him reaching above me to get something from the shelf, his body grazing my back. Everything seemed charged with a meaning I couldn't name, but felt viscerally. At 11 in the morning, we took a break. He lit a cigarette, the only one he allowed himself during work hours, and leaned against the barn wall. I should have gone home, gotten water or something, but I stayed. I leaned against the wall beside him, keeping a respectful distance, but closer than I usually would. We stood there in silence for a few minutes. I watched the smoke rising, dissipating into the cold air. And then, without planning it, I asked, "Marcos, do you like working here?" He looked at me sideways, surprised by the question. "It's honest work. Your father is fair." "Why?" "Just curious. You seem... I don't know, sometimes it feels like you're somewhere else, thinking about something else." He took a long drag before answering. "Everyone is always somewhere else, in some way, thinking about what was, what could have been." "And what do you think about?" The question was invasive. I knew it. It crossed the boundaries of our work relationship. But I needed to know. I needed to understand this man who occupied so much space in my head. He stayed quiet for so long that I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, surprisingly, he said, "I think about how the choices you make at 20 define who you become at 40. I think about marrying too young, to the wrong person, for all the wrong reasons. I think about my dad never really getting me, and how I did the same thing to my kids before the divorce." I stopped breathing. This was the most personal conversation we had ever had. He was opening up, revealing layers he kept carefully hidden from everyone. "And do you regret it?" I asked softly. "Some things, yeah. Others, no. Mistakes teach you. Pain shapes you. I wouldn't be who I am without every bad decision I made." He looked right at me then, and the intensity in his eyes stopped me cold. "But there's one thing I learned, Lucas. Hiding who you really are, pretending to be something you're not just to make other people comfortable. It eats you up from the inside, slowly, until nothing real is left." My name. He rarely used my name. And the way he said it, with that weight, that seriousness, it felt like a warning, or an invitation, a recognition of something unspoken between us. "Do you think everyone hides parts of themselves?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not everyone, but many. Especially when the truth about who we are doesn't fit into the box the world has prepared for us." I wanted to ask if he was talking about himself, about me, about us, but I didn't have the courage. Not yet. Instead, I stood there, side by side with him, sharing that moment of suspended vulnerability, feeling that something fundamental had shifted, that a door I didn't even know existed had opened, just a crack, but enough for me to see that there was much more on the other side. When he put out his cigarette and said, "Let's get back to work," I replied, "Yes." But my mind was completely elsewhere. It was processing every word he had said, every glance, every loaded silence. Standing there in the barn with cigarette smoke hanging in the air, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't just being curious. I wasn't confused either. I was falling, hard and fast, for a man who was everything I shouldn't want. A man who'd complicate my life in ways I couldn't even predict. And the scariest part? I didn't want to stop. I didn't want to retreat to the safety of ignorance. I wanted more of those conversations, more of that closeness, more of him, even knowing that every step in that direction was a step towards completely unknown territory. Have you ever felt that kind of attraction? The kind that isn't just physical, but stirs something much deeper? That makes you question not just what you want, but who you fundamentally are. That feeling of being on the edge of a cliff, knowing that one more move and there's no turning back. That's exactly where I was. On the edge, looking down, knowing I should retreat, but starting to look for reasons to jump. And Marcos, with his silence, his weathered hands, his few but powerful words, and eyes that saw right through all my defenses. Marcos was the cliff, and the reason I wanted to jump. That afternoon, I started looking for excuses to work near him. I didn't need to pretend it was unconscious anymore. I knew exactly what I was doing. And for the first time in weeks, I was starting to accept that maybe, just maybe, what I felt wasn't just confusion. Maybe it was the beginning of finally understanding who I really was. I stopped pretending I was innocent. That's the truth no one wants to admit when something like this starts happening. We create excuses, justifications, little lies we tell ourselves. I'm just being friendly. It's normal to help someone who works so hard. There's nothing wrong with wanting to get to know someone better. But there comes a moment when you know. You know exactly what you're doing when you decide to take extra coffee out to the barn. You know what you're looking for when your eyes scan the grounds searching for that specific silhouette. You know why your heart races when you hear the sound of his truck arriving in the morning. I knew, and I kept doing it anyway. By the third week, everything had shifted. The routine I'd built, the coffees, the quick conversations, the stolen moments, wasn't enough anymore. I wanted more than stolen glances and brief words before he had to get back to work. I wanted real time. Time alone with him, without interruptions or him checking the clock to get back to his jobs. And then the perfect opportunity arose. The old barn at the back of the property needed urgent repairs. Part of the roof was sagging, and my father mentioned during dinner that it needed to be fixed before it rained again. I, who had never shown the slightest interest in barn maintenance, suddenly offered to help. "I can supervise," I said, surprising myself with how casual it came out. "So, you don't have to keep checking on things." My dad looked at me like he didn't quite get it, but he wasn't against it either. "Sure, if you want," he said, and went back to eating. And that was how, the next morning, I found myself walking toward the old barn with a perfectly acceptable excuse to spend hours alone with him. He was already there when I arrived, assessing the roof damage with that quiet concentration I had learned to recognize. When he saw me approaching, something crossed his face. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. As if he too knew exactly what was happening. "I came to help," I said, with all the words we weren't saying hanging in the air between us. He nodded, that simple movement I'd come to know well. "This'll take a while," he said. And there was something in his voice that said he meant more than just the roof work. We worked in silence at first. Him up on the rafters, me passing tools, holding lumber, doing whatever I could to be useful. But there was a different awareness now. Every time our hands touched while passing a tool, every time he came down the ladder and stood just a little too close, every glance that lingered a second longer than necessary. The barn was stifling, hot even with the cracks in the roof letting in sunlight in thick, dusty beams. I could see sweat forming on his neck, running down into the collar of his work shirt. I could smell the old wood mixed with earth and that scent of his that had become almost addictive to me. "You don't need to be in here," he said when he came down the ladder for water. "It's like an oven." "I want to," I said, and we both knew I wasn't talking about the weather. He studied my face for a long moment, his dark eyes locked on mine in a way that made it hard to breathe. "Why?" he asked quietly. It was a simple question, but loaded with so much meaning, I felt like I was at a crossroads. I could give a safe answer, keep up the facade, keep pretending, or I could be honest. "Because you're different," I said finally, the words slipping out before I could censor them. "Because when I'm near you, I feel, I don't know, awake. Like I've been sleeping my whole life and suddenly someone turned on the lights." Raw vulnerability. I had just exposed something I didn't even know I was feeling until the words left my mouth. He didn't answer right away. He just kept looking at me with that same intensity. Then he set the water bottle down and moved closer. "You know what's crazy?" he said, voice low. "You're like who I was before I learned to hide who I really am." My heart was pounding. I could hear it in my ears. Hide from what? From wanting things that'll mess everything up. He was close enough now that I could see the scars on his hands, the way his fingers were tight, like he was holding back. From wanting you. What if I want to be complicated? The words came out sounding braver than I felt. My voice shook. This was new territory, no instructions, nothing certain. All I knew was that something was happening between us, something real and unavoidable, and I was done pretending it wasn't. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if fighting an internal battle. When he opened them again, there was a resolve there that hadn't been before. "You don't know what you're asking for," he said. But his hand moved, slow, hesitant, until it touched my shoulder. That touch. God, that touch. It wasn't much, objectively speaking. Just the palm of his hand against my shoulder, his fingers resting lightly on the curve between my neck and arm. But it was as if every nerve in my body had woken up at the same time. I could feel the warmth of his skin through the thin shirt I was wearing. I could feel the contained strength there, the weight of everything that wasn't being said. We stood there like that, neither of us moving. Suspended in that moment, the whole world erased. Then he slowly pulled his hand back. The air between us felt heavy. "We should get back," he said, but he didn't step away. "Yeah," I said, but I didn't move either. The rest of the afternoon passed in a kind of trance. We continued the repair, but everything had changed. Every movement was loaded with meaning. Every silence was loud with unsaid things. I was hyper-aware of every detail. The way he climbed the ladder with natural ease, how his muscles tensed under his shirt when he lifted the heavy beams, how he occasionally looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. When the sun began to set, painting the inside of the barn with shades of orange and gold, we realized we wouldn't finish in one day. "It'll need another day, maybe two," he said, putting away his tools with that quiet efficiency I had learned to admire. "Then I'll come back tomorrow," I replied immediately. He stopped what he was doing and looked at me. "You don't have to." "I know. I want to." Something shifted in his face recognition, maybe acceptance, and some relief. Like he was tired of pretending too. "Okay," he said quietly. "Tomorrow then." We walked back to the house without talking, but it was a different silence. Not awkward, just full. Full of what was coming. Full of possibility. Full of knowing that everything had just changed between us. When we reached the point where our paths diverged, he to the small worker's cottage where he was staying, I to the main house, we stopped. "Thanks," I said, knowing it wasn't enough but not knowing what else to say. "For what?" he asked, a small smile on his face. "For letting me stay." He looked right at me for a long time. "I couldn't push you away if I tried," he said quietly. Then he turned and walked to his cottage, and I stood there in the dark, still feeling the heat from his hand on my shoulder. That night, I could barely sleep. Lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I could feel everything changing. It wasn't about morning coffees or casual conversations anymore. It wasn't about innocent curiosity or developing friendship anymore. It was about desire. Raw, undeniable desire, which had been recognized by both of us in that dusty barn. And the scariest part? I had no idea what to do with it. But I knew one thing for sure. Tomorrow, when I went back to that barn, we wouldn't be pretending anymore. We both knew what was happening now. The only question was what we would do about it. You ever feel that impossible pull? That need for something mixed with the terror of what happens if you actually take it? That razor-thin line between wanting and fear? We were both on that edge. And with every hour, we got closer to the moment when we'd have to make a choice. I closed my eyes, still feeling the ghost of that touch on my shoulder, and wondered if he too was lying awake, thinking the same thing, thinking about me. In the days following that touch in the pasture, something changed between us. Not explicitly, but in the energy, in the tension that filled every silence when we were close. I started avoiding him, consciously. I left the house earlier, came back later, took alternative routes through the farm so as not to run into him. But the more I tried to distance myself, the stronger that magnetic pull became. It was like trying to ignore your own heartbeat. My dad started noticing. At dinner, he'd look at me with that look I'd known my whole life. "You're not yourself," he said one night, chewing his food slow. "Something wrong?" I shook my head and went back to eating. "No, just tired." But he wasn't stupid. I could see it in his eyes. Suspicion. That father's instinct for sensing when something's off with your kid. And that terrified me. Because how would I explain it? How would I tell my father, a traditional man who built everything with his own hands, that his son was feeling things for another man? A man he himself had hired? Shame and fear mingled within me, creating a knot in my stomach that wouldn't loosen. But the universe has a cruel way of forcing confrontations we try to avoid. It was a Thursday afternoon, the sun already low on the horizon, painting the sky orange and purple. I was mending the north corral fence, far from the main house, when I heard footsteps in the dry grass. I didn't need to look to know who it was. My whole body recognized his presence even before my eyes confirmed it. "You're avoiding me," he said. Not a question, a fact. His voice made my hands shake. I kept hammering, not looking at him. "I've got work to do," I said. "The farm won't maintain itself." "That's bullshit." The word hit hard. He moved closer, and I felt his presence like heat. "You're terrified of what happened, of what you feel." I dropped the hammer. "I don't know what you mean," I said, but my voice came out defensive. He let out a laugh, but there was no humor in it. It was bitter, heavy with things he'd already lived through. "I know that fear," he said, leaning on the fence beside me. "I spent years running from it, thinking that if I ignored it, if I kept myself away from anything that could awaken that in me, I would be safe." For the first time since he arrived, I looked directly at him. There was something different in his eyes now. Vulnerability. Old pain. "Why do you think a man my age works alone on other people's farms?" He continued, looking at the horizon. "I could have built something of my own. Could have had a family, a property, but men like me." He paused, and I saw his jaw tighten. "Men like me learn that we don't have the right to happy endings." My chest got tight. "What do you mean, men like me?" I asked, even though I already knew. I needed to hear him say it. I needed him to. He looked straight at me, and in his eyes I saw decades of loneliness, unfelt desire, lives not lived. Men who are attracted to men, who hide their whole lives, who push away anything real because the world says it's wrong, that we're wrong. I felt like the earth had opened up. There it was, the truth I'd been burying since the day he arrived, finally said out loud. The words stuck in my throat. "You're scared," he said for me. "Scared of your father, scared of people talking, scared of the age difference, of what it'll look like, scared of yourself, of what you feel." Each word hit like a punch, stripping away every defense I'd built up. "And what if I told you," he continued, voice quiet but steady, "that I've been through all this, that I let chances pass, that I let people go because I thought fear was bigger than desire, that I've spent years wishing I'd had the guts to do things differently." I swallowed. "Why tell me this?" I barely got the words out. "Because I see who you were in me 20 years ago, and I won't let you waste your life like I did." He moved closer, and I could see the lines around his eyes, the years marked on his face. "But I can't make this choice for you. I can't tell you it's worth the risk. So what is this? The words came out before I could stop them. What's between us? My heart was hammering so hard I thought he could hear it. There was the question I'd been avoiding, finally asked. He breathed in slowly, like he was gathering himself. For me? It's attraction. It's wanting you. It's a feeling I haven't had in years, maybe ever. When I look at you, I see someone real, someone who hasn't been shaped by what the world expects yet. And that scares me. I stood there taking it all in. I could barely breathe, my whole body shaking. I don't even know what I am, I finally said, my voice cracking. I never questioned any of this before you. I never, but now I think about you constantly. Want to be around you. I keep imagining. What? He asked gently. What do you imagine? I closed my eyes and pulled courage from somewhere deep. Kissing you, touching you, feeling your skin on mine. It scares me, confuses me, but it also makes me feel alive in a way I've never felt. The silence was electric. When I opened my eyes, he was staring at me with an intensity that made my legs feel weak. You get what's at stake here? He asked, his voice rough. Your dad finds out? I'm gone. No job. You deal with his judgment. Everyone's judgment. The age difference, people will have plenty to say. They'll call you confused, say I'm using you. It won't be simple. I know, I said, and I meant it. I knew all of it. I knew the risks. What could go wrong? All the damage this could do. But something stronger than fear was building in me. A desperate certainty. Then be sure, he said, stepping back. I won't be the guy who ruins your life. I won't be a regret you carry around for the next 20 years. That's when something inside me finally broke. All those weeks of tension, denying, being afraid, holding it all back. I stepped forward, closing the gap. What if I don't care what they think? I said, my voice steadier than I felt. What if I'm done living scared of other people's opinions? His eyes went wide, real surprise on that weathered face. You don't understand what you're saying. I do, I said. And for the first time, I really meant it. I've been the good son my whole life, the responsible one, doing everything I was supposed to. And look where it got me, safe and predictable and empty. You came here and woke something up in me I didn't even know existed. Maybe I'm confused about what I'm feeling. Maybe I don't fully understand it, but I know it's real. I know that when you're near me, everything makes sense. I could feel his guard drop. His hands came uncrossed, relaxed. Your dad. My dad's gonna have to deal with it, I said firmly. I'm an adult. These are my choices. If he can't accept that, I'll deal with it when I get there. But I'm not letting his fears or anyone else's run my life anymore. I don't know where that came from. Maybe it had been sitting inside me the whole time, waiting. Maybe it was just desperation finally feeling something real, something worth everything. Or maybe it was just him, this presence that pushed me and made me feel safe at the same time. You're really sure? He asked again, his voice different now. Less doubt, more hope. I stepped closer until we were almost touching. I could feel his warmth, smell dirt and sweat and just him. I'm sure I want this. I'm sure I don't want to spend my life wondering what if. I'm sure... My voice got quiet. I want to kiss you. I watched the moment he let go of the last thing holding him back. His eyes got darker, his breathing heavier. Then do it, he said quietly. And there was challenge in those words, but also something vulnerable that reached into me. My heart was pounding as I reached up and touched his face. The skin was rough and weathered, nothing like anything I'd ever felt. He closed his eyes when I touched him, and I felt him shiver. I leaned in slowly, giving him a chance to back away, but he didn't. And when our lips met, the whole world disappeared. It wasn't gentle or careful. It was hungry. Desperate years of him being alone and weeks of me holding back, all of it coming out in that kiss. His hands pulled me close, and I stopped fighting it. Just let myself sink into him. Nothing I'd imagined came close. The taste of him, how his body felt against mine, the quiet strength of his hands holding me like I was something precious and fragile both at once. When we broke apart, we were both breathing hard. He rested his forehead on mine, eyes still closed. "You don't know," he whispered, his voice shaking, "how long I've wanted to feel this. To feel like it meant something." I moved my fingers through his hair, just able to do it freely. "I was so scared," I said. "Scared of what this is, of who I was becoming." "You're not becoming anything," he said, opening his eyes and looking at me with a gentleness that tightened my chest. "You're just discovering what you've always been. And that takes courage." "Courage or madness?" I asked, a half-trembling smile on my lips. He smiled back, and it was the first time I saw a genuine smile on that face. It completely transformed his features, stripping away years of tiredness and loneliness. The best things in life lie on that fine line between the two. We stood holding each other as the sun finished dropping, the sky getting darker. I knew we'd just crossed something we couldn't take back. Hard conversations were coming. Fights, probably, maybe worse. But right then, with him against me, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be for the first time in forever. "What's next?" I asked, still holding him tight. He breathed in, and I felt his chest move against mine. "We take it slow. No rush. What's ahead won't be easy. We gotta know for sure what we want before we face everything coming." "I want you," I said. And I meant every word. "That I know for sure. And I want you," he said, pulling me closer. "More than I should. More than makes sense. But you need to understand, this is just the start. The real hard part is still coming." "What hard part?" He pulled back to look at me. "Making it real. Getting out of the shadows. Facing your dad. Living this openly. Because I'm not your secret. I'm not someone you sneak around to see. This is either real and worth fighting for, or we stop now before it gets worse." His words hit like a punch. He was right. One kiss behind a fence was just the beginning. The real test would come when I had to look my dad in the eye and tell him I was with another man. That this man worked for us. That he was old enough to be my father. That I was throwing away everything he expected of me. "I get it," I said, and I really felt it now how big this was. "And you're right. It won't be simple, but you've already lived with so much regret. I don't want to be another one. And I don't want to regret you either." He nodded, something like respect in his eyes. "Then here's the deal. We figure this out. We find out what it is. But when we can't hide anymore, when the moment comes, you'll have to choose. And whatever you choose, as long as you're honest, I'll accept it." I stuck out my hand weird to be formal after just kissing him, but it felt right for how serious this was. "Deal." He squeezed my hand and pulled me in for another kiss. This one softer, less urgent, more like a promise. When we finally broke apart, the sky was almost completely dark, stars starting to show through. "I should get back," I said, not wanting to. "My dad's gonna wonder where I am if I'm out too late." "I know," he said, but kept holding me. "Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," I said, and those two words felt like they meant everything. I walked back with shaking legs and a heart that wouldn't slow down. I went inside and found my dad in the living room with the newspaper. He looked up at me. You were out at the fence a long time. Work took longer than I expected, I said, trying to sound normal, even though my lips felt swollen from kissing him and my face was probably flushed. He watched me for a second, and something crossed his face. Did he suspect something? No? I couldn't tell. Be careful out there, was all he said. Then he went back to his newspaper. I went to my room with those words in my head. Be careful. Did he know? Did he see something? Or was it just normal dad stuff? I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the future for the first time. A future where I didn't hide, where I could look at him without hiding. No shame, no fear. It seemed impossible and completely possible at the same time. Would you have had the guts to risk everything for something you barely understood? To face people judging you, rejecting you, losing everything for something forbidden and uncertain? Lying in the dark that night, I knew I'd made a choice that would change everything. No going back. The kiss was a turning point, but this was just the beginning. And for the first time in weeks, underneath the fear was something else: excitement. Because I wasn't running anymore. I was moving toward whatever came next, and he'd be waiting. That old truck had never seemed as intimidating as it did at that moment. Marcos held my hand with a firmness that wasn't authoritarian, but protective, as if he knew I needed that touch not to disappear. Come, he said, opening the passenger door. Just us. I got in. The characteristic smell of diesel, grease, and masculine sweat enveloped me again. But this time it was different. It wasn't just curiosity. It was real, raw, unfiltered desire. Marcos got in on the driver's side, and for a moment we just sat there, in the silence broken only by the distant sound of crickets. He looked at me, said nothing, just looked at me in that way that disarms any defense you still think you have. "Lucas," he began, his voice hoarse and low. "If you want to stop now, I'll stop. But if you continue, I don't know if I'll be able to control myself." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I wanted to say something clever, something that showed I was in control. But the truth is, I wasn't. And for the first time in my life, that didn't scare me. "I don't want to stop," I said, and my own voice sounded different, firmer, more me. Marcos moved closer slowly, as if giving me every chance in the world to change my mind. But I didn't. When his lips touched mine again, it was different from the kiss in the kitchen. That one had been discovery. This was certainty. He pulled me onto his lap, and suddenly I was sitting on those strong legs, feeling the weight of his body against mine, feeling every muscle, every breath. His hands moved up my waist, under my shirt, and the touch was warm, rough, real. "You're so young," he murmured against my mouth. "So beautiful. And you're so—" I couldn't finish the sentence because he kissed me again, deeper, more urgent. Our clothes began to come off, first my shirt, then his. And when I saw that broad chest, covered with gray hairs and marks from years of hard work, I understood what it truly meant to want someone. It wasn't just physical attraction. It was wanting to get lost in that person, wanting to be consumed by them. My hands trembled as I touched his chest. "Marcos, I won't describe every second, every movement, every moan. This isn't porn. This is about connection. And connection isn't measured in explicit details. Connection is felt. What I can say is that in that tight truck cab, under that starry sky I could barely see through the fogged-up window, I finally understood who I was. I wasn't confused. I wasn't lost. I was discovering. And the difference between those two things is everything. When it was over, we lay there, intertwined, sweaty, breathing heavily. Marcos held me like I was something precious, like I mattered. "You okay?" he asked after a while, his voice still raspy. "I'm different," I replied. And it was true. I felt different, more whole, more present. He laughed softly. "Different how?" "Different like I finally make sense." Marcos went quiet for a moment. Then, he turned me to face him and held my face in those large, calloused hands. "Lucas, I need to tell you something." My stomach tightened. Here comes the part where he says it was just sex, I thought. Here comes the rejection. But it wasn't. "I thought I'd die without ever feeling this again," he said. And for the first time, I saw his eyes mist over. After my wife died, I thought that. That part of me had died with her. Not the sex part. The part about really feeling something for someone. I didn't know what to say. I just managed to stay there, looking at him, realizing that that huge, strong man was completely vulnerable in front of me. "You made me feel alive again," Marcos continued. "And I know this might sound heavy. It might seem like I'm dumping all this on you, but I needed you to know. You weren't just a moment. You were important." My eyes filled with tears. Not tears of sadness, tears of relief, of validation, of feeling like I wasn't alone in this. "You were important to me too," I said, and my voice came out choked up. "You helped me understand who I am." Marcos kissed me again. It wasn't a sexual kiss. It was a kiss of gratitude, of genuine affection. We stayed there for hours, talking, laughing, sharing stories. He told me about the truck, about the roads he'd traveled, about the places he wanted to see. I told him about my fears, about my family who would never understand, about the future I didn't even know if I wanted anymore. "What now?" I asked at some point in the early morning, when the sky was already starting to lighten. "What do we do now?" Marcos took a deep breath. "I don't know, kid. I really don't know." And somehow, that honest answer was better than any empty promise. "I still need to decide what to do with my life," I said. "With college, with everything." "And you will decide," Marcos said, running his hand through my hair. "But now you decide knowing who you are. And that's already halfway there." He was right. I didn't have doubts about my sexuality anymore. That had been resolved. But now came the harder questions. How was I going to live this? How was I going to embrace this? How was I going to look my mother in the eye and say I wasn't going to be the son she expected? "You're scared," Marcos observed. "Very. It's normal. But do you know what's worse than fear?" I shook my head. "Regret," he said. "You can live with fear and still move forward. But regret paralyzes you." Those words stayed with me. They stay with me to this day. When the sun finally rose completely, we got out of the truck. Both of us rumpled, clothes askew, but with a smile on our faces that we couldn't hide. "Do you have to go?" I asked, knowing the answer. "I need to hit the road soon. I have a delivery out in the countryside." My chest tightened. "And are we going to see each other again?" Marcos pulled me into one last hug. A tight hug. One of those that says more than 1,000 words. "Lucas, I don't know what the future holds, but I know you're going to be okay. You're strong. Stronger than you think." "I don't feel strong." "Nobody does, but you are." He kissed my forehead, got into the truck, and I stood there, frozen in front of my house, watching him drive away. Part of me wanted to run after him, to scream for him to stay, to beg for us to try something. But I didn't. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't about him. It was about me. Marcos had been the catalyst, the person who helped me open a door I was terrified to open. But now that the door was open, I needed to decide if I was going to walk through it or not. I went inside. My mom was still sleeping. Everything was exactly how I had left it. But I wasn't. I was a different person now. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of being who I really was. Or at least I was starting not to be. Because accepting who you are isn't a moment. It's a process. And that night had just been the first step. I went up to my room, closed the door, and looked in the mirror. The reflection looking back at me wasn't the confused, lost Lucas, afraid of everything anymore. It was someone who had made a decision. Someone who had allowed himself to feel. Someone who had courage. I finally understand who I am, I said out loud, just to myself. And it was true. I was gay. I liked men. Older, masculine, strong men. Men like Marcos. And there was nothing wrong with that. But now came the hardest part. How was I going to live this in the real world? How was I going to face my family? My friends? The society that had taught me since I was little that I should be one way, when I was completely different. These questions didn't have answers yet, but for the first time, I was ready to start looking for them. I threw myself onto the bed, exhausted, but strangely at peace. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, slept without nightmares. Because I finally knew who I was, and that, somehow, changed everything. The next morning arrived with that soft light that always invaded my room through the old curtains. I woke up alone, but his scent still lingered on the sheets. Diesel, sweat, something undefinable that was just him. I ran my hand over the pillow beside me and smiled to myself, feeling like an idiot and happy at the same time. Everything seemed the same. The farm waking up, the roosters crowing, the distant sound of my father already moving things around outside. But nothing was the same. I wasn't the same. I had crossed some invisible border during the night, and there was no way back. I dressed slowly, every movement reminding me of the night before. My muscles ached in a good way, an ache that made me smile while I buttoned my shirt. I looked in the mirror and saw someone different looking back. It was still me, but there was something in my eyes that wasn't there before. Confidence, maybe. Or just the peace of finally knowing a part of me that had always been hidden. When I went down for coffee, he was already there. Sitting at the kitchen table with my father, drinking black coffee from one of our old mugs. Our eyes met for half a second, and it was like the whole world paused. He looked away first, but I saw the corner of his mouth curve slightly. My father didn't notice anything, kept talking about fixing the fence in the north pasture. "Sleep well?" my father asked, without looking at me, focused on the old newspaper he was reading for the third time that week. I did. "Yeah," I replied, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. "Better than I have in a long time." The ranch hand looked up at me again, quick, and there was something there. Protection. As if he was ready to intervene if my father noticed anything. That warmed me on the inside in a way I didn't expect. The following days were a careful dance. Stolen glances when my father wasn't looking, brushing hands when passing tools. Completely normal conversations about work that carried layers of meaning only the two of us understood. "I need you to help me with that tractor," he'd say in front of my father, but his eyes said something completely different. "Sure, I'll be there later," I'd reply. And we both knew it wasn't just about the tractor. At night, when the farm finally slept, I'd find myself lying awake, listening to every sound, waiting. Sometimes he came, sometimes he didn't. But there was always that possibility hanging in the air, that silent promise. A week after that first night, what I knew would eventually happen, happened. My father knocked on my bedroom door early, before sunrise. He entered without waiting for an answer, as he always did. "We need to talk," he said, and my heart froze. I sat up in bed, trying to read his expression in the dim light. He was serious, but not angry. That scared me more than if he were shouting. "About what?" I asked, pretending not to know, buying time. He sighed, ran his hand over his tired face. "I'm not blind, son, and I'm not an idiot." The silence that followed was the heaviest of my life. 1,000 excuses, 1,000 lies ran through my head, but none came out. Because finally, after everything, I didn't want to lie anymore. "Dad, He raised his hand, stopping me. "You don't need to explain. You don't need to justify yourself." He walked to the window, looked out at the farm that was his whole life. This land, this place, it demands a lot from us. Sometimes it demands that we hide who we really are just to survive. My throat tightened. I didn't expect that. "But you are my son," he continued, still with his back to me. "And if there's one thing I've learned in all these years, it's that life is too short to be unhappy. His voice cracked a little. "I just want you to be careful. People here, they don't understand, and I can't protect you from everything." "I know," I whispered. "I know, Dad." He turned around, and I saw tears in his eyes for the first time since my mother died. "He's a good man. I see how he works, how he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. Just be discreet. Please." I got up and hugged my father for the first time in years. He went rigid for a moment, then hugged me back, tight, like when I was a kid and woke up from nightmares. "Thank you," was all I managed to say. When he left, I sat back on the bed, trembling. Not from fear, but from relief, from gratitude, from something that looked a lot like hope. Later that day, I found the ranch hand in the barn. I told him everything. He listened in silence, then took my hand, interlaced our fingers. "And now?" he asked. "What do you want?" It was the question I had asked myself 1,000 times in the last few days. And finally, I had an answer. "I want you," I replied. "I want this. I don't know how it's going to work. I don't know what comes next. But I know I don't want to pretend nothing happened. I don't want to go back to who I was before you." He smiled. That small, rare smile that made me feel like I was falling and flying at the same time. "I don't want that either. But it's going to be difficult," I said, needing him to understand. "We'll have to hide. Be careful. The people here." "I know." He squeezed my hand. "I've lived my whole life hiding who I am. At least now I have a worthwhile reason." We stood there, in the dusty silence of the barn, holding hands like two boys, scared and brave at the same time. Outside, life went on. Cattle lowing, wind in the trees, the distant sound of a tractor. In the weeks that followed, we found our rhythm. We developed our own language of glances and small gestures. A hand on a shoulder that lingered for half a second too long. A shared smile over some inside joke. Stolen nights when the moon was dark enough. It wasn't easy. There were days when the frustration of having to hide almost suffocated me. There were moments when I wanted to scream to the whole world that he was mine, that I was his, that it mattered. But then he would look at me in a specific way, and I remembered that some loves are just like that. Silent, hidden, but no less real because of it. He taught me things I never knew about myself. He taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, but doing the right thing despite it. He taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness. He taught me that love, true love, is a choice you make every day, especially on the difficult days. One night, a few months later, we were lying in the barn's hay, looking through the roof gaps at the stars outside. He was tracing invisible patterns on my arm with his fingers, that distracted way of his that I'd learned to love. "Do you regret it?" I asked, breaking the silence. "What?" "All of this. Me. Having to hide." He stopped the movement of his hand, turned me to look into my eyes. Never. Not for a second. He kissed my forehead, my eyes, my lips. "You gave me something I thought I'd never have. You gave me a place to belong." "You too," I whispered against his mouth. "You gave me the courage to be who I am. To stop being afraid of myself." And it was true. Before him, I was living half a life, hiding half of myself. Now, even having to be careful, even knowing we could never be completely open about what we were to each other, I was more whole than I had ever been. Months turned into seasons. Summer scorched the grass, autumn brought rains, winter arrived cold and relentless. And through it all, we continued. A silent constant in the chaotic farm life. There were challenges, of course. Moments of near exposure that scared us. Once, a neighbor almost saw us. Another time, my father almost walked into the barn at the wrong moment. But we always managed. We were always careful enough, always lucky enough. And there were moments of pure happiness I never imagined possible. Stolen mornings before sunrise, whispered conversations in the dark, shared laughter over things only we two understood. The feel of his hand in mine, hidden under the table during dinner. My father reading his newspaper, suspecting nothing. Today, as I write this, I look out the window and see him outside, mending the fence, muscles working under his shirt, that concentrated way of his that made me notice him from the start. And my heart still races. I still feel that tightness in my chest that I felt the first time I admitted to myself what he meant. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe one day we can leave here, go somewhere we don't have to hide. Maybe not. Maybe this is all we'll ever have. These stolen moments, this silent love, this double life. But I learned something important. Some connections change you forever, regardless of the outcome. He changed me. He taught me that truly loving someone means being vulnerable, means taking risks, means choosing courage even when every fiber of your being is screaming at you to run. And if I could go back to that day he arrived at the farm, to that first time I felt something stir within me, I wouldn't change a thing. Because he gave me the greatest gift anyone can give. He gave me permission to be myself, to stop hiding who I really am. Sometimes love doesn't come with guarantees. Sometimes it comes with risks and fears and the need to be careful, but it's still worth it. Every stolen second is worth it. Every shared glance is worth it. Every time I wake up and remember he exists, that this is real, that I'm no longer alone in my own skin, it's worth it. So if you're watching this and you recognize yourself in this story, if you're struggling with who you are, if you're hiding a part of yourself because you're afraid of what others will think, I want you to know. You deserve to be loved exactly as you are. You deserve to find someone who looks at you the way he looks at me. You deserve to stop hiding. It's going to be scary. There will be difficult days. But there will also be moments of such pure happiness that you'll wonder how you lived so long without it. And maybe, if we're very lucky, one day we won't have to hide anymore. Neither of us. But until then, we move forward. Choosing love. Choosing courage. Choosing to be ourselves, even when the world says we shouldn't. Because in the end, it's these choices that define who we are. And I choose him. I choose this. I choose to be brave. And you? What would you choose? If this story touched you in some way, if it resonated with something deep inside you, leave a comment and let me know. Tell your story, share your truth, and subscribe to the channel, because more stories like this are coming. Real stories of real people trying to discover who they are and find the courage to live authentically. Because in the end, we all deserve that kind of love, that kind of connection, that kind of courage. We all deserve to be seen, to be known, to be loved exactly as we are. And sometimes, all we need is one person to look at us and say, without words, just with their presence, "You are safe with me. You can be who you truly are with me." That's what he gave me. And I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for it. Thank you for listening to my story. Until next time.